All right, so I'm going to go back to Xcode. We're going to go File, Open, and I'm going to go find my YT Player demo folder. That was the last folder I was in, so it just took me there. So here's where I was saying we have the Xcode project. We have the pods that were added. And if we just open those up, you're going to see the YouTube player pod there, as well as some other files that it needs and folders it created through the install process. And then we have this XC workspace. That's what I'm going to double click to open, or just choose it and choose open. So we have our YT player, the files we normally would have. There's a pods folder here, but we also have pods down here. Okay? So just work with it now the way you would normally work with your project. So we're going to go to our storyboard. And I'm going to create this for an iPad. So I'm going to change my device. And I have an iPad 10.5 inch. That's what I'm going to use. And we'll get this a little bit smaller. If you have an iPhone, you might want to do it for an iPhone. So now I'm going to go to the library. And we're going to add a view. I'm going to grab the view. I'm going to put it up here. That's going to be what contains our video. And I'm going to go ahead and create some constraints. So I'm going to have this be basically 10 from the top, 10 from the left, and 10 from the right. And these should all be to the safe area or the view. So I'm going to add those constraints. I have one more constraint here, and that's going to be the aspect ratio. I'm going to come back and change that aspect ratio. So I'm just going to say add that constraint. So now, in the panel on the right, I'm going to go to the size inspector and double check that those came out correctly, because sometimes Xcode does some strange things here. So those all aligned 10 units to the top, the leading and the trailing. And then the aspect ratio, I'm just going to edit this, because since we're working with high definition video, it's always going to be basically 16:9. Oops, I didn't want to put that there. I want to put it down here. 16:9. And then I'm going to come over to the identity inspector. So that's the middle inspector. And we're going to change the class of this view. I'm going to start to type YouTube. And as soon as I do that, I'm going to get a YouTube player view. Okay? It's just another view that's part of that pod, but contains all the information it needs to make this a video player view. So we're going to set that up as our class. Then I'm going to go to the attributes. And I'm going to change the background just so we can kind of see it here. I'm going to choose maybe a dark gray. And then just to test this ability, that this YouTube player works, before we start building out our buttons and things like that, let's add in, anybody need me to pause? Okay, I'm going to add in the assistant editor. We're going to go to the view controller and get rid of the library for now. And we'll give ourselves a little space here. Actually, I like to have these reversed. We could do it either way, but I like to have this one be the storyboard. And this would be the controller. All right. So I'm going to control drag from our viewer to our Swift file. And I'm going to name this video view. And what's interesting is it should have came up as a YouTube viewer. Okay, so let me, oops, I'm going to cancel that. For some reason it didn't take my class. So I'm going to delete that for now. Let's get rid of this. Let's go back to the inspector here and try this again. So YouTube, and it may be that I didn't press the enter key after that. So it's probably the case. So now let's try this again. I'm going to control drag over to here. Notice now it comes up as a YouTube player view. That's what I wasn't seeing. Okay, so let's do video view and connect. We're going to say let video URL. I'm doing this inside of the view did load. So we're going to load a video as soon as the project starts. Oh, one thing that we need to do here before we get too far, I want to import YouTube player. And we can use URL method, and we're going to pass it a string, and the string is going to be the video we want to play, the YouTube video we want to play. One. And in those files that I had you download was a Microsoft Word document that said YouTube, the title was YouTube Player, and has some videos that we're going to use. Okay, so here's the video that what I started with for the COVID-19. I put one up here from NASA, and then one of my own videos I was playing around with. So you can choose whichever video you like. Actually, I'm going to take the one with my dog, copy it, and I'm going to paste it in. I got spaces there. Now this YouTube, that link can be either the link that you would see up on the title bar of your browser when you're playing a video, or that I also tested with the share for a video. So let me jump over to YouTube again. So this link up here is what I copied, but you can also go down to share. You can get this copy one. It's basically a shorter version, and that will work as well. You just copy and paste it in, whatever video you want to use. And then we're going to say video view dot, and there's a method called load video. Now there's two of them here, load video URL and load video ID. The URL is the full URL. The ID is just the stuff that comes, in this case, after the equal sign. And both of those will work, or either one will work. I want the video URL in this case. And the video URL that I want to put in here is, let's see, I used the name video URL, see if that causes a problem. Sometimes that can. Nope. Let's try video URL. Okay. So I didn't have to specify the parameter name in front of it. Apparently they did the underscore prior to that, so it was optional. So when we load our program, we're going to specify the URL we want to play, and then we're going to load that into our video view. I'm going to test. There we go, loaded it. I can click play. I ran it in my iPhone simulator. Now the cool thing is we can also now take and rotate, and the video's in its own layer, so it will size as you rotate.
Oh, hello. My name is Steven, and this is Serenity.
Okay, so that all worked. Questions? Everybody get theirs to work? I'll take silence as success.
I've got to download CocoaPods. I figure I'd do that later and follow your video.
Sure. Yeah, it does take a few minutes to install that. And if you're running Mojave, it took me about 10 minutes probably to update Ruby. And the update of Ruby also goes through the terminal. Just be aware of that. All right. Do you guys want to see me lay out those buttons, or are you comfortable now using the constraints and auto layout features?
I'm comfortable with the buttons and constraints.
Okay.
You know, I've had trouble doing auto layout, and also the whenever we're trying to reverse it, I've had
adaptive.
Yeah, adaptive. I had a lot of trouble with that.
So welcome to the club, Tony. I think those are the worst part.
Nightmare.
I agree.
Yeah, that's the worst part of developing. People who do this every day get really good at it. And so one of the tricks I found, this came more out of Xamarin, because I tend to do my development in a product called Xamarin, which is C#. And there you can do both Android and iOS at the same time. And I kind of like their layouts much better. And they're using XAML for their layouts, which is a Microsoft kind of XML format. But one of the things I learned through Xamarin was to use containers a lot. So let me see if I can demonstrate this in Photoshop.
Is that going to be containers similar to like when you're doing web development, like when you're writing an HTML page, HTML5?
Yeah, like divisions?
Yeah. Sort
of, yes. So I'll show you how I did my video project. And just let me just create a new one here. Okay, let me get rid of my extras. So here's how I laid it out. So here's the video. And I'm just going to color that red. And I had to play around a while to get this to work. So again, Tony, this is not easy. If you don't do this a lot, it's not that easy to do. But so I then created a stack view. So I'm just going to do a stroke around that. Okay, so there's my stack view. Now in the stack view, I did a label. So this was sort of my title label. And then I did another label down here. This kind of becomes more of the copyright information. So in essence, I'm kind of creating a little storyboard here. Then, this is where the trick comes in. I added another stack view. Now this stack view is a horizontal stack view. So my first one was a vertical. And then inside that stack view, I created two more vertical stack views. And I'll go back and show you the storyboard once you see this conceptually. Now, the cool thing about a stack view is it'll maintain spacing for you and allow you to stack items inside that stack view. In order to get the side-by-side columns, I needed a horizontal stack view inside the vertical. But each of these stack views, I then wanted to have vertically the buttons. So I'm going to get a little gray color here. And then, so I created my button. There we go, with the magic wand. Okay, so I'm going to take my button. I took a little bite out of it, but you can get the idea here that I then just simply created my buttons, and I did the same thing over here. And I let the stack view then take care of the spacing. Okay, so that's how I laid it out in terms of getting those two columns for the buttons. Then I worry about going back and adding the code. So let me bring up my final project here. Let's see. Okay, so if we look at the hierarchy here, there's my video view, and we can see the constraints that I added, the aspect ratio here, but I also added constraints which are going to appear further down here in terms of how it's reacting to the view. Now here's my stack view. So my stack view in this case is all of this area. It contains my title label, my lower label, and the stack. Now let's look at how I set this up in terms of the stack view itself. So the alignment is center, and the distribution is equal spacing. And I specified 0 spacing in this case. The label, all I did was I set a constraint to the top of the stack view. Let's come over here and we can see the constraints that are set. I guess I didn't set a constraint there. I thought I had. So the stack view takes care of putting it at the top. And then same with the bottom here. So this bottom label, I did tie it to the stack view. So this, actually, I know what I did. The stack view, I simply tied to the top of it to this label and the bottom of the stack view to this label. So it uses whatever size it needs and keeps the labels at the top and the bottom. Now, that's...
So did you put the two labels in first and then the stacks?
It doesn't matter. As long as when you go to set up the constraints, they're in the order you want, because it will use the placement of the nearest object to help you set up the constraints. So for example, this label, if I look at the constraints, if it was above the science of COVID-19, it would not show up here as an option to set it to the top.
Okay.
Now I think I could probably change that in the size inspector later, but it's just a whole lot easier if you put them roughly where you want them. And I would say don't have them overlapping, leave a little bit of space. Even when I created this view up here, I originally just made it small, and then I set the distance to the top left and right, or leading and trailing, to 20 pixels or 30, whatever I used, and set the aspect ratio to 16:9, and it gave me the size that I wanted. By the way, the aspect ratio is one that I found you almost always need to go back in and modify. So like we come in here, usually I'm not going to get 16:9. It's going to use whatever size that view is, or that control is. So I always have to click edit and change the multiplier to 16 to 9. All right. So now in that stack view, between those two labels is my my horizontal stack view. And I set to top and equal centering. And I had to play around with these a little bit to get it to work the way I wanted it to work. I have not seen a good definition of the differences in terms of what's the impact of equal spacing versus equal centering or fill proportionally. Now, one thing I did as a little trick here in that stack view, I forgot to mention this in my diagram, I've got my two other stack views, the stack view of these buttons and the stack view of these buttons. But here's a little trick I did. I created another label, and that label basically contains 3 or 4 spaces as the text. It's basically just an empty label. And I did that so that I could take that label and set up a constraint that it would be centered. And then I simply set this stack view constraint between the edge of the parent stack view and that label. And did the same thing with this one. The leading is to that label, and the trailing is to the parent stack view. And that allowed those to resize appropriately and give me a little column of emptiness here in the middle. That's just a little trick that I've learned in using Xamarin. So now each one of those stack views, if we expand the hierarchy here, are my 4 buttons. And this top button, as far as the constraints, so expand this out a little bit, I made it 5 to 1. I set that as the aspect ratio for that button. There's another constraint here. And that is the bottom space to the second button. And by the way, I named these all just by clicking over here. So you can click here and change the name. It'll take the name that's used for the text if you don't do that. But I just named these so I knew which button it was talking about when I go in the constraints. This is okay, this is the button A2 or button A3. I set the spacing between button A1 and button A2. In this case, I did 20 pixels or 20 units. I didn't set spacing on anything else because the stack view I set to fill and equal centering, and it then took all the other controls and made them the same. And I don't know what would happen here if we did equal spacing. Sometimes these have no impact. Equal spacing might be the more appropriate one to use because you want these equally spaced. So sometimes you have to play around with these things.
I think if your button wouldn't be 5 to 1, if your button was 3 to 1, then the equal centering is what would bring it to the center of your container.
Okay, that probably makes sense. Thank you. Anyway, that's why I laid stuff out. And then let's go into our view controller. Again, it's just me, I like to have these reversed. And we'll get rid of these panels. Okay. So for the button, I have an outlet called Play Video A1. And again, I set these up before I coded them. So, and I only set up the 4 that I actually used, but you could do the other 4, or if you want to have 5, 6, whatever. My code here is I simply specify the URL that I want to use. And again, you can use that URL ID to save a little bit of typing if you wanted. And then I made another function called Play YouTube Video URL, which is simply up here where I'm passing it the URL. That saved me having to basically copy this code each one, although I really didn't save any space, I suppose. But if you want to do some other stuff with this before you play it, maybe you want to set up some parameters or set the audio to a certain level, you can do that. And I basically use the same format for all the others. What I did was copy and paste the code and just change the YouTube reference.
Can you set the videos to automatically start playing when the app loads, or does it have to?
So if you set it up here in the view did load, it will play. Well, it won't play automatically. Let's see. Could we do automatic play? I see what you're talking about. So let's do video view dot, and I think there's probably a play command here. There's a play command. So let's just try that. And I'm going to run this.
The problem we had in HTML5, couldn't get things to autoplay when we were doing class.
Yeah. So we'll see if it plays when it loads. We know it'll load. Oh, it didn't play.
I think that they probably just frown on that nowadays.
In December 2019.
Did you have to tell it which one to play when you did the video play? Do you have to tell it which one?
So I do. I pass it the video URL, which I've created as a variable. So I'm doing that up here. And then I'm doing it, I get my video URL and I'm passing it here to this method. I could have simply done this. So we'll do this first one. And so here, I just want to change this to video URL. There we go. So now it's not using this method anymore. And it's basically the same amount of typing. But again, if you want to do other stuff when you play the video, you have that ability. Before I play that, I'm going to come back here. So the answer to your question, Kyra, might be no.
I know we looked around with Niall and I looked, we couldn't figure out how to get a website to autoplay nowadays. It seems like everything's kind of locked down.
Yeah.
It depends on your browser.
Like the YouTube site is actually locked down.
You can get it to autoplay as long as the volume is muted. That's most of the browsers won't allow it if there's actual sound.
Oh, really?
Yeah. But depending on the browser, you can always set it autoplay because there's an attribute for it. But depending on your browser, it's going to say nope, sorry, unless it's if it recognizes volume. But apparently there is a couple of different things that people have tried or have created some different things to do YouTube videos, and they've also done the same thing, setting up autoplay. I just did some Googling real quick. It looks like sometimes you have to actually be interacting directly with the frame review in some kind of way in order for it to autoplay, quote unquote. So
yeah, so you might just Google for some information on, especially with the YouTube player, see what options are out there. I would think there's probably some help documentation that might be described in that CocoaPods page, because usually people maintain a website as well of documentation. You might find something there. Okay. Oh, we were going to test to make sure that that button now worked by not going to the method. So I'm just going to test that real quick. And it does. This is kind of a fascinating little video because we think of these masks as being filters, and it's not a filter as far as allowing particles to go through. It basically works on static electricity.
March 2020, there's a good chance you didn't know what an N95 mask to touch their fiber.
So I encourage you to watch that video. I found it really interesting. All right. So I'm going to write this up as an assignment. If you just jumped into this video, you can see all the videos from the iOS app development cohort playlist by clicking on the image in the lower right. And if you'd like to be alerted to future videos that I create, you can click my picture up in the top right and subscribe to the channel.